Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're looking at the legendary 2005 Champions League final. But we're not just going to look at this as a historic football match. No, we're actually breaking it down as a literal blueprint for human resilience. So here's the core question we're exploring today. How do you bounce back when you're 3-0 down? I mean, sure, it's a daunting, almost impossible sports deficit, but let's bridge that extreme sporting deficit to the overwhelming emotional deficits we sometimes face in our daily lives. You know that feeling, right? That feeling of being totally out of the game with absolutely no clear path back? Here's our roadmap for the Explainer, what we like to call the anatomy of a miracle. We'll start with the ultimate underdog story. Look at a first-half nightmare, the critical halftime reset, those 6 minutes of madness, the penalty lottery, and finally, the psychology of bouncing back. All right, Section 1, the ultimate underdog story. David versus Goliath in Istanbul. Stepping onto the pitch in Istanbul for the final on May 25, 2005, AC Milan was absolutely packed with global superstars. We're talking guys like Kaká, Andrea Shevchenko, and Hernan Crespo. They were the undisputed European powerhouses. Liverpool FC, meanwhile, well, they were the heavy underdogs. They'd barely scraped into the final, actually finishing 5th in their domestic Premier League that season. So right from the jump, the mismatch was totally clear to anyone watching. Which brings us to Section 2, a first-half nightmare, or the tactical collapse. Now, what's really interesting about this is how both teams set up. Right from the opening whistle, the game was fast, punishing, and completely overwhelming. Milan used a 4-3-1-2 diamond formation, while Liverpool opted for a 4-4-1-1. And here's the kicker. Milan's setup brilliantly allowed their star playmaker Kaká to exploit these massive spaces right behind Liverpool's central midfield pairing of Xabi Alonso and Steven Gerrard. Basically, you had two Liverpool players trying to mark one incredibly dangerous Milan player, and honestly, it left the English side completely exposed. And we can see the sheer destruction of Liverpool's defense play out here. Literally in the very first minute of the match, Milan's captain Paolo Maldini volleys in a goal. Then, exploiting that exact midfield space we just talked about, Kaká breaks through and sets up Crespo to fire home in the 39th minute. And just 5 minutes later, right before the whistle in the 44th minute, Crespo beautifully chips Liverpool's goalkeeper Jerzy Dudek. It was brutal. By halftime, Liverpool were completely buried. Let's just pause for a second and look at this quote from Liverpool captain Steven Gerrard reflecting on that exact moment. He said, "To be 3-0 down, I felt physically sick. There's a part in you that is saying it's over." I mean, just try to imagine the suffocating tension and the utter despair hanging in that locker room. They weren't just losing, they were facing total, utter humiliation on the world stage. Okay, moving on to Section 3, the halftime reset, Benítez's masterclass. So the crucial point here is that manager Rafa Benítez didn't just walk in and yell for more effort. No, he methodically changed the entire structure of the team. First, he switched to a 3-4-2-1 formation. Second, he brought on the defensively minded Dietmar Hamann to sit deep and protect the defense from Kaká. And third, maybe most importantly, with Hamann providing that much-needed cover, Benítez was finally able to push Steven Gerrard forward to attack. It was a real game-changer. He sacrificed a defender to shut down their opposition's biggest threat while completely unshackling his own best player. But, it wasn't purely about tactics. Look at this observation from football legend Diego Maradona. He said, "They showed their unconditional support at halftime when they were losing 3-0, and still they didn't stop singing." The Liverpool fans were just absolutely belting out their anthem, "You'll Never Walk Alone." This beautifully illustrates the psychological concept of community support during a crisis. That unwavering belief, it gave the players a real reason to step back out onto that pitch and fight for their pride, rather than just throwing in the towel. And that takes us to Section 4, 6 minutes of madness, the comeback. And this brilliantly illustrates where the energy of the match shifted with just chaotic, breathtaking speed. Benítez's tactical tweaks paid off in a spectacular flurry of goals. In the 44th minute, Gerrard, who, remember, is now pushed forward, powers in a massive header. Barely 2 minutes later, in the 56th minute, Vladimir Schmitzer hits this unbelievable long-range strike. And then in the 60th minute, Xabi Alonso scores off a penalty rebound. The game is tied. 6. That's the number of minutes it took to erase a seemingly impossible deficit and completely shock the world. Let that just hang in the air for a second. 6 minutes. That is all it took to completely rewrite the reality of the game. Next up is Section 5, the penalty lottery, where preparation meets luck. So after a grueling extra time, which actually featured an unbelievable point-blank double save by Jerzy Dudek against Shevchenko in the 117th minute, the match went to penalties, and the tension was agonizingly tight. Milan missed early, and Liverpool pushed ahead, with Hamann actually scoring his penalty despite playing with a broken toe. After trading some incredibly intense moments, the whole thing ultimately came down to Milan's star, Shevchenko. Dudek is on the line, employing these incredibly distracting spaghetti legs antics inspired by the late Pope John Paul II. He dives, but blocks the shot with his left hand. Just like that, Liverpool wins the shootout 3-2. But here's the thing. This lottery wasn't just blind luck at all. Behind the scenes, Liverpool's staff had secretly analyzed Milan's penalty tendencies beforehand. They knew exactly which side the Milan players favored. So this massive victory was actually heavily grounded in intense homework and clinical preparation. Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, the psychology of bouncing back. Life lessons from the pitch. Now, clinical psychologist Dr. Paul Gaffney points out a really dangerous emotional state, and that is hopelessness. It's when one feels completely unable to face a challenge, which often leads to giving up entirely. Dr. Gaffney notes that feeling 3-0 down in our daily lives triggers this exact state of hopelessness. It literally makes us feel like the match is already over, which is exactly how Gerrard felt in that locker room at halftime. Let's move to the next part and see how this builds, because the exact tools used in Istanbul map perfectly to an actionable strategy for protecting our own mental well-being against depressive thoughts. First, you need community support, like those fans singing in the stands. Second, you need tactical shifts. That means trying out new coping methods when your old ones fail, just like Benítez changing up his formations. Third is step-by-step progress. Don't try to solve the whole 3-0 deficit at once. Just focus on getting one goal back. And finally, teamwork. Relying on others, just as those attacking players relied on Hamann's defensive cover. I'll wrap up this explainer with a brilliant thought from Dr. Gaffney. He says, somehow things will get better next week, next month, next year maybe. In that sense, football people are optimists. And that's absolutely crucial. Whether you're in sports or just navigating life, you have to maintain the underlying belief that a comeback is always, always possible. So, I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought. Next time you're facing a 3-0 deficit in life, what will be your second-half strategy?